And I did ask them, I said, where are you taking my husband? And they wouldn't answer. So it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and both cars went away. Well, for 3 weeks, we didn't know where they were. So I went to the local Air Force, and I said, we've had this terrible thing happening. Can you give me any idea of what's going on? And he said, I'm sorry, I can't. You just have to have patience. Patience. So anyway, eventually I had a letter from an English friend in Prague, whose husband also had been arrested. All were fighters in the Second World War. And she wrote to me and said, explained what had happened at her house. Her husband had been arrested, and she knew the prison where they had been sent in Prague for questioning. I don't know that, I've forgotten the name of the prison, but it was a prison in Prague. And there started his terrible fate, his tragic fate. And he was in all kinds of prisons, and he ended up in the uranium mines in Yakimov, where he died. Well, that was a tragic fate for a hero, and all I can say to the Czech voters is to be very careful who you elect to office, and particularly the younger crowd, who don't seem to be terribly worried about the disastrous effect of political prisoners everywhere. The last time I visited the house, my husband in prison about 3 or 4 times, and we were only allowed 2 minutes conversation. And it was in the prison in Prague, and there were all the officials listening to every word we said. And when he came in with 2 guards, he wasn't allowed to touch me. And all the officials were listening into the conversation, so it was very difficult. But Joe did turn around and say, why wasn't my wife, the letters I sent to my wife, why were they not delivered to her? Shut up, they said to him. And I was so angry and very young and not very, I was passionate in my belief. And I said, wait till I get to England. If I go to England, I'll tell Churchill about this. I'll tell everyone about what I've seen. And they, told me to be quiet. And then the man conducting the interview said, Mrs. Bryksová, I want to speak to you in my office, you see. So I thought, oh boy, I've said the wrong things and I'm not helping my husband. So anyway, I went in, and he said that my indiscretion was unforgivable. And he lectured me a bit, and he said, any letters that you send your husband will be strictly censored. And any more outbreaks, what I said, will be held against your husband. So it put me in a very difficult position. So I said to him, you speak perfect English. Were you in Britain during the war? And he said, yes, I was, but I prefer to forget those days. And I'm warning you, he said, if you do that again, you will be in serious trouble. So that was the reception I got. And probably I was indiscreet, but I wasn't going to let them know that I was going to fold under their auspices. So it got very bad, and all kinds of insults were thrown at me. And anyway, I had to leave the country. I had my baby, and it was a terrible influence or terrible thing to happen to a family. And I sympathized with all the relatives and the wives of all political prisoners. It's a dreadful thing for any country to do. It's uncivilized. So I hope that this panel discussion will think about the banning the whole idea of political prisoners. It's not a sign of a civilized country. Well, I heard through the grapevine eventually that my husband had died. And I asked the person who told me this whether I could see them, because they had been released from communist prison and were now living in England, which was a mystery to me. So they said they couldn't help me. So I decided when the country was freed from communism, I would go and find out what happened to my husband. In the interim period, I went to the Czech embassy in London, and I said, I've heard that my husband is dead, and I want confirmation from you that this is a fact. I want to know. And this official said to me, that is not possible. We cannot get any information to you. It will take 2 or 3 months before we can get confirmation. I said, that's absurd, because you have the diplomatic bag, you have the telephone, you have every means of finding out. And he said, Madam, we cannot help you. So I said, well, if you don't help me, within 48 hours, I'll go to the press and I'll broadcast a scandal, this treatment. So then he said, Madam, remain seated and I will be back in 10 minutes. So I wondered what was going to happen. So when he came back with 2 files in his hands. One was a very thick one, the other one was a very small one, and he started to go through the files. Well, they were my husband's file and my file. They had kept a file on me. So he gets my file and he thumbs through it. He said, I see you are a reactionary. And he implied that my movements, or whatever they had got against me, was responsible for my husband's fate. Well, I was disgusted. I said, I haven't come here to listen to anybody preach to me about communism or the evil of it. I was angry with him. And he said, I'm very sorry, madam, we cannot help you. So I said, very well, I will put the story in the press. So I called in the press, had a press conference, and told them what had happened. And it was the Daily Telegraph in London. And they said, we print our international edition in a couple of weeks, and we will include the story. Well, of course, the story broke. Within 2 months, I get a letter from the Czech embassy, a very short letter. Your husband died in, I think it was 1957, August 1957, and of a heart attack. That's all they said. So I couldn't get any information because there was no correspondence between England and Czechoslovakia. So what happened, when the country was freed in 1991, I decided that I would find out for myself what had happened to him and the disgusting, unjust imprisonment that a man of character and patriotism would have to suffer that way. So I called, because I was in the Royal Air Force myself as a WAP, and I went to the RAF for help. And they called the embassy in Prague, and they found my husband's name. He was highly decorated by the British government for his bravery. And he was on their computer, and the wing commander I spoke to said, I will get our team on the problem and see what information we can gather. So he called me about 2 weeks later, and he said, well, of all the coincidences, I have just seen the first film that's been made about your husband. And when you come to this country, we will be happy to see you and to show you this film. And we will call a press conference, which they did. And a lot of Czechs were managed to get to Britain after the war were present. And it was revealed, and I spoke to them and told them what I knew about the whole thing. And then I didn't know whether the family was still alive. I had no connection with the family at all. And when I saw the film, I saw Carol, who is sitting there, and his brother in the film, helping to explain the situation of the man. So I went and saw the film, and it was very tragic to see it, really. And then I decided I would make contact with the family, because all they knew that Joseph had married an English woman. They knew nothing more about me at all. I could be dead for all they knew. So I decided to get I called Cheddar in London and asked them to provide me with an interpreter when I arrived in Olomouc. And that happened. And I told the interpreter what had happened. And she said, I will call the family. So someone that they thought probably was dead suddenly turned up. And so we had a reunion in Lashtoney where Carol and his brother and the family lived. And it was a terrific event. And when I got back to London, the Royal Air Force said, well, we will have a press conference. And they had a big press conference. And it was reported in all the newspapers and everything else. And it was an unjust, horrible sentence for any country to pass on its citizen for a good, patriotic man who had never done anything that deserved such punishment. And so from that moment on, the case was known in Britain, and lots of news followed. And then when I saw the film in Prague and realized what was going on, I started to inquire about all this stuff that went on that I knew nothing about. And so all I can say about this whole political prisoners, I think it's an insult. I think it's a terrible insult to a civilized country to pursue such horrible policies just for the ambitions of certain individuals that want to ruin the lives of its own citizens, and for a country to put its citizens in prison for an unjustified charge is simply disgusting. I believe that all people that are elected to Parliament, to the Czech Congress, should make an oath that they will never pursue the political prisoners syndrome. That if they break, they promise, if they fail, they lose their job in Congress. And I think the whole idea of political prisoners should be banned from this earth. It's disgusting. So that's what I've got to say about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Trudie Bryksová.